Hi, and welcome to the Glean Blogcast. Higher education is rapidly evolving, and both institutions and educators need to keep pace with ever-changing student needs and classroom dynamics. That's where we come in. Our mission is to make learning quicker and easier for everyone. In this series, you'll hear inspiring stories and practical tips from industry experts and frontline educators. Join us and uncover how to create learning environments where every student can thrive. Let's dive in.
Really great to have you with us. A special welcome if it's your first time on a Glean webinar. So, who am I? That's what you might be thinking. I'm Dave Casey. I'm proud to be the AI product lead here at Glean. I was previously head of product, and I moved into an AI role this time last year. I have a cognitive science background, which covers a broad base of AI, psychology, neuroscience, and philosophy. I've often described it, my elevator pitch, is the study of the nature of human intelligence across all those disciplines, work out how they all interrelate and what that means for us as humans. While studying in my final year, I had a special interest in natural language processing, which is pretty apt given the latest advancements in generative AI, which essentially leverage natural language processing and transformers and stuff like that. If you don't know what any of those words mean, that matter. We're not going in at that level today. Not just who am I, who are Glean? Why do we exist and what do we do? Well, Glean helps users record and take note on their class in a super simple way so that no information is lost, which enables you to support students better and improve their outcomes with learning. And we're trusted to do this by over 750 higher education institutions that now use Glean for better note-taking accommodations, some of which we're delighted to have on the slide in front of you. But yeah, we're here today to talk about AI and its relationship to accommodations. And a little bit of background on AI will probably get us started. So AI has been helping improve search and detect spelling errors since the 1990s. Now, sometimes we don't think about this as AI. With those technologies like spell checkers that consider the context of someone's written and suggest corrections to spelling or grammar. But we also have things like predictive text, transcriptions and live captions, face or person recognition, which might have unlocked your phone today, or sort of image annotation, image detection. Maybe your phone is suggesting pictures of your friends or something like that. Then we sort of had this milestone, I guess, of OpenAI being formed in 2015, with the famous Elon Musk as one of its founders, who's no longer involved with the company. And in 2018, they released something called GPT-1. And since then, we've started to see that this generative AI can complete unsupervised learning tasks. But the limitation at the time with that data, or that system rather, was that it only used scraped data from a certain point in history. And so that was sort of 2018 backwards. And that was a really good example of how the implementation of AI can create a bias. And in this case, the bias was the ability to basically provide answers based on anything new. It couldn't do that. It had a bias to something old. And now we live in the world of GPT-4, which can search live on the web. And that was essentially the movement to remove that bias. Now, there are numerous examples, unfortunately, of students on high-impact courses asking AI to generate images of them in their future careers, only to be shown race or gender stereotypes. And we know even now, in the relatively established domain of transcription and captioning, there has been an ongoing struggle to remove bias, which can cause inaccuracies with the voices with certain characteristics, essentially a race bias. There's research from Stanford on this, amongst others. So we know that this bias exists. And so the potential for an undeclared bias in this generative AI raises some questions about how we navigate that world. This generative AI is AI which can predict context and content for us. So these large language models, of which the GPT models from OpenAI are one version, raise questions about how much reliance on AI is appropriate, especially in education. So before we dig in further, a little bit of interaction for you. I'm going to launch a poll. What percentage of students said AI-powered study tools help them feel confident with difficult academic material? according to Carnegie Mellon University 2021. Thanks for getting your answers in. Right, let's have a look at those responses there. So some good spread of responses. The leading response is 52%. The actual result there was 72% of students said AI-powered study tools help them feel more confident with difficult academic material. Certainly, if anything, that number may have increased over the last couple of years with these generative AI models coming to the fore. So yeah, what does this mean for AI in education? So the availability of generative AI and a wealth of educational material now essentially means everyone can create a personal tutor. That thing you need help with, you can ask for it, no matter how embarrassed you might feel about needing to ask. We know that tutoring is a high-impact education strategy. As far back as 1984, it was coined the Two Sigma problem by Bloom. Tutoring had such a big impact that it was seen as a problem because it couldn't be made available to all, and yet it was such an advantage. So now it is potentially available to all. Why wouldn't we put this power in the hands of students using an AI chatbot? We are now living in a world where students can create their own tutor, and a wealth of information exists on prompt engineering to create the tutor they need. Some examples are from McKinsey's prompt engineering report. There are also a wealth of personalized tutor tools already built that companies have made. A forefront of this is Khan Academy. They've built technology that not only tests students, but provides materials related to their interests. And when they ask, why should I learn this? Khan Migo, the tutor bot, knows how to respond. And it also, crucially, knows it's a tutor and that its job is to guide or coach or teach, not just to give the answers verbatim. But this raises the question of how much help is too much help. If anyone saw my little invite video to this webinar, you might have also noticed I got a haircut since then. I explicitly said how we can use AI technology to support students' learning and not just do it for them. And that's something I'm really passionate about here at Glean. So student A has an accommodations for peer note-taking, one-to-one assignment preparation, deadline extensions, and text-to-speech software. Now, we might be in a world where the peer note-taker might actually take summary notes rather than record the lectures, so they're getting some sort of written summaries. A staff member who might help with assignment preparation to scaffold things for the student and help get them started. And some text-to-speech software that can speed up and make the process of reading faster than it would have been for someone without accommodation. Now, a single AI technology or a chatbot could provide many of these same accommodations, with the exception of perhaps a deadline extension. They can help with the note-taking or the summarizing, the assignment scaffolding and tips on how to approach that, reading assistance, as well as prompts and reminders. So there is an argument to be made that making these AI tools and functionality available to students increases inclusivity. However, it's really crucial that we make sure we aren't removing the parts of the process which actually assist in learning, in information retention, and those wider learning processes, but focus the AI essentially around removing learning wastes, the bottlenecks which consume time and take up valuable cognitive load, which is such a precious resource. At Glean, we're currently working to two principles around AI. So it should not do things for the learner, but it should remove their constraints, and it should not shortcut the learning process, but it should make it more efficient. And I think those are really good principles that we're kind of working through at the moment. And there are some interesting parallels here from other industries, and I won't go into these at length, but the lean manufacturing waste back from sort of the Industrial Revolution on to Toyota more lately, they have this idea of removing the waste in the process. So you still need to maximize your output, but there are places you can optimize that. As one example, they have one called non-utilized talent. So essentially, the spare time or ability that is potentially not being used effectively. And so here's an example where maybe good use of AI could help. There might be barriers to access in terms of the way the information is presented that AI or technology can overcome. But also, can we perhaps make small steps from big tasks, breaking it down, like we just said, to assist with that assignment, which makes the most of a student's time, cognitive load, and motivation, and gives them the right task for the right time. And there's lots more of these ways that we could unpack, and maybe that's a whole other web. So we've been focused in our institutions on developing student creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration skills, as well as the explicit understanding of the discipline we're studying. And this collaboration with AI as a tutor, as a support tool, is potentially another angle we can go with. Now, one of those skills that becomes really important is critical thinking for the student. So if AI is telling students information is correct, are our students skilled enough to critically evaluate what has been shared? Now, of course, the AI isn't going to say this is correct. It's just going to give you an answer. So we need to make sure we're instilling that understanding in students around how the AI works, and we'll unpack that more shortly. So in answer to how much help is too help, I think a really good question, too much help rather, I think a really good question is this in line with previous accommodations? And we just saw an example of it. And if the answer is yes, and it's no more than that, then that probably is the right amount of help. But then there's a really interesting additional part, which is how does usage of AI in the wider population of students, including those without accommodations, affect? Now, time's going to tell on that front, and I don't have the answer for you today. It's such an emerging field and an interesting topic that's developing in front of us. But if our accommodations are designed to create equity, then the wider use of AI in the wider student body may impact what is equity. And so I think that's a really interesting conversation to have, and that's just always a point of interest to have a think about. Now, one thing we definitely know in terms of how we engage with AI is that it's really important that students actually engage with the materials themselves. And this comes back to not shortcutting the learning process. So we don't actually know, because it's so new, what really good learning with AI definitely looks like. There's lots of interesting things happening. There's lots of things that look promising. But we can definitely draw on what we know about learning as a whole, which is summarizing and engaging with learned materials, turning them into your own words, has a significant boost of learning and test performance. So retrieval practice, elaborative descriptions, spaced practice, and these kind of things, they don't go away with AI. They should be the linchpin of what we do with AI. There's some studies that kind of evidence this. Transforming a lecture into one's own words and organizing or integrating the lecture content boosts performance. Moorhead and al. 2019. Put simply, exposure to material is not enough. Students have to engage with it. They have to be active participants in their learning. We don't measure success in terms of the number of articles a student read. We look at how they've applied what they've read and their prior knowledge and what arguments have been formed. We look at how they've synthesized the information. The human level of involvement is really important. Learning is a personal process, and this is one of the huge advantages of AI, its ability to adapt to the learner and create a personal experience. Chubb and al. 2022 say a human reduced to any number of data points is a poor facsimile. Rather, humans are agents of meaning. The reader of a scientific article does not simply process the words in an article, they interpret and they experience. And it's in that interpretation and that experience, that's where the learning happens. If we're not careful, AI creates more information overload and less learning. So, covered a little bit of the landscape there. I hope that was interesting. So we've touched on this loosely in a broader perspective. So what does it look like to consider the AI tools or functionality and capabilities coming into the software that we provide in our department? So the landscape here is going to be constantly shifting to ensure equitable access. And so one thing stands true. If we're giving access to tools which have AI capabilities, we really do need to be mindful of how these tools work. so that we can educate students on their limitations, which as we touched on earlier, might include various biases. And just as we would educate a student on the limitations of any other, it's worth keeping in mind that two tools which have AI capabilities might have completely different limitations and risks. And I do think we need to make sure we don't just art all AI with the same brush and just treat it the same in the same way that, predictive text is arguably AI, but we wouldn't sort of be concerned about that or treat that the same as maybe generative AI tools that are coming out now. So as an example of how these large language models and their implementations might differ, one may be able to retrieve answers from the whole of the internet, like GPT-4, just unbridled GPT-4, and not declare its sources. One might be implemented to only retrieve answers from lectures that students attended. So there's clearly a difference there in the risk profile of it. So we need to understand these differences and pick tools which support the students in their learning and more broadly, as departments or institutions, we do need to be thinking about our policies, our ethical positions on the use of AI. So that when we're evaluating products, we don't just reject on principle, like I said, anything that just says AI label on it. As we saw at the start, AI underpins so much of what we use today, and that major shift is the generative AI. And so it is just really important that institutions determine their principles around AI and procurement and ensure that the accommodation's goal is still to support equity and not shortcut learning. With the students themselves, we do need to educate them on how the tool works and its fallibility and its limitations. Perhaps the best advice that I have at the moment is try to get students to treat it like a classmate and not an infallible entity, which is the temptation with something like generative AI. Making clear that just like other AI they've used, like predictive text, probably something they're familiar with, perhaps, sometimes it might be wrong. And the problem is, it's harder to discern that error with the generative AI. So with that, student education and understanding, hand in hand with the institution's procurement and understanding of what are risks of the tools it advocates for, I think we should be able to get to a reasonably good place. I went too far ahead. And the other thing I'll just speak before we'll jump into a demo of our new AI feature and a quiz to get some engagement. I'll probably be able to mute myself for some of that, so you have to deal with the beeping noise. So we do hear this a lot, and it's quite a broad statement, and I think there's lots of conversation to be had here. It might be great as a kind of round table at some point. But some faculty seem to be very concerned about AI tools and the impact on teaching and learning and how educators can adapt to that. Now, there's a few different angles to this kind of comment, which we have heard and we are aware of within like wider discourse. And so the first thing to say on this is these are like my personal thoughts and reflections, so they're evolving. But my one angle we could take this is that sometimes this feels like a statement akin to a concern from institutions themselves or professors, that somehow the whole of education that we've created today will be replaced with sort of automatic AI courses. I think there's a few things to say on that, which is, number one, educators and institutions, we have a real opportunity here to focus on the core of what learning is about. Approaches like flipped learning, monitoring engagement, going back to principles of pedagogy, and focusing on the demonstration of knowledge rather than just how we deliver that, which tends to be where that kind of stuff lives. And some institutions have a basis in rigorous peer-reviewed research, either creating it themselves or being at the cutting edge of what's new and coming out and sort of distilling that for their students. This means that higher education can stay at the cutting edge. AI can only train on what's in the public domain. And so institutions can always stay ahead of the curve in that regard with their peer-reviewed research and journals, because these are not public domain. There may be exceptions to that with very niche tools, but in general, it's going to be the case that the generative AI has a general understanding, whereas an academic has a depth of understanding about what's happening in their field. As we've talked about, there's an importance around procurement of policies of AI tools, and these should prevent unauthorized use of content. This is owned either by the institution or the educator. And so your own internal policies do need to reassure educators that the institution's intent is to use recorded and saved data in an appropriate way, and that obviously needs to extend to any tools you bring in your institution. And then the last thing to say on this is students want to learn about their chosen discipline in and of itself, but they also require the credential that you're providing. And that's why they're there, and that's what they're working towards. And so that's a really great opportunity, because we as educators, as people in this domain, get to shape education going forwards. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity. So in my opinion, education is going to need to embrace AI, but this is something that's done before. So whether it's captions, spell checkers, speech control, a lot of this has its roots in accessible technology, sort of pioneered by education. And so the difference here, I'll say it again, is that we're now working with this generative AI tool, which has the potential to be less constrained and have a less traceable reach. And so specifically, this technology is likely going to play out in a number of areas, but the key ones, student assessment and ongoing study support. So assessment's an interesting one. When it comes to assessment, there's always the risk of abuse, and that's always existed prior to this generative AI. People can purchase or outsource their coursework. Now, the difference is the potential reach that this technology to create content to people has now. And so I think there's an exciting opportunity to focus back on how we show knowledge and understanding and comprehension, and focus on the process students take as part of their learning. Now, perhaps the dream eventually will be that some students have a method to prove their knowledge acquisition, understanding, and application in a process almost akin to a PhD Viva or something like that, an oral, if you like. And who knows, maybe AI will eventually move from a threat to the opportunity and the solution here and make that a reality. But we can also use some of this AI tooling to contribute more broadly to a body of evidence that provides, with a submission of work, the authenticity mark from the student that this is in their tone of voice, and here's the kind of proof of work they've undertaken. Now, I'm not saying that is where things will go, but I'm just saying the technology that potentially is causing the problem may also have solutions down the track. And so then the other side of this is the potential of AI to provide ongoing study support. So as we touched on earlier, we're now in this world where everyone can create and possibly afford a personal tutor because it's an AI chatbot. And so this lets you ask those embarrassing questions. It can help you find things in the reference material that you vaguely remember. I think sometimes we can feel a gut level reaction to an AI chatbot because it's AI. And I think maybe we need to ask ourselves, would we be concerned if a human tutor who we couldn't vouch for and we didn't know personally was doing the work a student might now use AI for? We might be used to, as we saw earlier, having this situation where students get outline notes and they get some scaffolding for their assessments. The tutor bot can do this now, potentially. And teachers and educators agree there's huge value in tutoring, and that 2 sigma problem from 1984, potentially ceases to be a problem now. It becomes an opportunity with this generative AI. So that comes with a balanced approach of educating ourselves in the nuances of AI, the scope of reach of the generative AI technology we recommend, and having clear principles internally in our institutions around procurement and what we believe the AI should do, i.e. support learning and not accidentally replace it. So AI becomes another tool, or rather the underpinnings of many tools that we can utilize to empower students to support their learning.
Thanks for listening to the Glean Blogcast. Turn on your notifications and follow us on socials to be the first to know about the next instalment. See you next time.